The purpose of this video is to give an introduction to the capabilities in regards to Stage 2 research project. Now, I've been doing a bit of drafting of capability stuff lately, and I've noticed that for most research project students, this is a real area of weakness, and it tends to be something that's done fairly superficially, and there's certainly room for us to do a better job of this. So the purpose of this is to really talk you through what capabilities are, what their relevance is to the research project, and what you should be doing in order to build your capabilities. The general capabilities, you might have heard of them before, though my guess is probably not too much. There are actually 7 skill areas that are spread across the Australian curriculum. The idea is that they're integrated into learning throughout your entire school life. And this comes down to this idea, well, what's really important? But what is important is the ability to communicate, to think critically, to understand different cultures and perspectives, to be emotionally balanced and regulated. This is what the capabilities are really all about. Capabilities aren't their own subject. They're not something that we actually sort of do on the side. The idea is we should be developing these skills in everything that we do. So when it comes to the research project, that's really the approach that we're going to take. There's this really common misconception that we just think about whatever the title is and then just make up the rest. But there's actually some really complex documents that help us to break them down. I'm going to go through some of these, but I suspect a lot of you probably haven't seen these documents before. So let's unpack this. I'm looking at just one element of critical and creative thinking. A common mistake we make, like I said, is just assuming the title. We say, oh, critical and creative thinking. Okay, well, I just came up with an idea, therefore I'm great at critical and creative thinking. That doesn't really count. Like, you've obviously taken the word creative and then sort of thought of something that you've done that involved some kind of broad sense of creativity. But that is actually not an accurate reflection of what the skill set is all about. So this is just one subset of that. So essentially, it's been broken down into what we call sub-elements, which you can kind of see on the far side here. So posing questions, identifying, clarifying information, ideas, organising things. You know, this is stuff that everyone needs to be able to do. But you notice it's not just that either. There's actually levels of these things, and the levels are associated with where students might be at particular points in their study. So you can see foundation, year 2, year 4, year 6. Now, it's not a problem if you're not at these levels or if you're not operating at these levels. The focus of this is that these are skills that actually should grow and develop. They're not just one thing. Like, my ability to pose a question isn't me just asking one question. There's lots of different facets of questions that I can learn and understand over time. So you can see at level 1, I might pose a factual and exploratory question based on a personal interest and experience. My kids will see something and they'll say, what's that? You know, they want to know. Like, they'll see a bug or something like that. What's that? You know, I want to know the fact about what that is. And it's based on my own experience in the garden. But you can see as it gets more complex, level 6 is about posing questions that critically analyse complex issues and abstract ideas. Rather than saying, what is that? You know, pointing to a physical thing and saying, what is the name of that thing? That's a fairly basic question. You know, an abstract idea is something that can't be seen, like feelings or tensions or conflict or elements like that. You know, what is the cause of this conflict, or what are the motivations that underpin this conflict? That's a really complex question about something that actually can't be seen. There's a difference between these things, and this is what I want you to really recognise. Let's jump across to the research project. The idea here is you choose one capability that you're going to develop. You look at the sub-elements of that capability and you make a plan to develop that skill over the course of your folio. So you kind of say, all right, I'm going to be researching into whatever, and while I'm doing that, I'm going to be practicing a very specific skill. Okay, so that's sort of the mindset. Now, sounds simple, but it's actually a bigger deal than you think. As I mentioned, most students have this as their weakest assessment criteria. All right? Baffling, I know. But let me talk you through a little bit about what it looks like so that you can get a bit of a sense of perhaps where you're sitting in relation to what I would expect to see from an A-level student when it comes to D4, the development of capability. So if you've looked at my example folio or my example research project, you'll know that I'm looking at graphic novels, okay? So the first thing that I would do is I'd choose my capability. Now, you've done a capability selection table. I'm not going to go into too much detail. These are the 7 capabilities. Let's say I'm picking literacy. Woohoo, fantastic. Now, your teachers have probably exposed you to this. This is an extract from the Research Project course outline, and it's made by SACE. Now, it's a bit of a weird sort of thing because they've summarized the guts of sort of what was in those continuums, and they've made it sound a little bit as though this is sort of the be-all and end-all, but it's actually not. Like, communicating with a range of people in a variety of contexts, yes, that's a skill, but there's levels to that skill that these statements don't really capture. So there's this really important kind of element to it when we think about, yes, these are things I need to do, but how do I know if I'm doing them kind of well or whether I'm developing them? Now, to move forward on this, I'm doing my graphic novel kind of thing. So I'm going to be looking at different graphic novels. I'm going to be making different graphic novels, all of that kind of stuff. So rather than just saying I'm developing my literacy, that's too broad, it doesn't make any sense. I've actually gone through and I have chosen some specific skills that are relevant to my topic. I want to be understanding the language of graphic novels as though I'm a professional artist in this area. Now, at the moment, I know very little about that language. So using language with increasing awareness, clarity, accuracy, suitability is going to be a really important part of that. So I know I want to develop my language, my vocabulary. I'm going to be making types of graphic novels, so I'm going to be making some different sort of forms. So composing those texts and understanding what is involved in the composition of that will be important as well. If I want to create a particular style of graphic novel, I'm going to need to understand or have a sense of the visual literacy of what that underpins. And furthermore, a developed understanding of the different text types. Now, I might be drawing different styles of graphic novels, so I'd need to understand the difference between those, but I should also know what's distinctive about graphic novels in general in comparison to other things like novels and films. So all of these things I've identified as being relevant. These are what I want to develop. You might freak out coming up to this point. So this is a freak out warning, okay? So if you want to pause the video, go and, just calm yourself down or scream into a pillow or have a cry, you're more than welcome. But hopefully when you come back, we're going to move on to this next section. I'm going to go a little bit more deep here. You heard me mention before when I was looking at those SACE statements, the problem with those is while I knew that they were relevant, I didn't necessarily understand how I could develop them. So now I've gone to look at what's called the capability continuum, which I showed you earlier on. And these documents look like this, and I've taken 3 extracts from it. Now, one of those wonderful things about life is the fact that those statements made by SACE in regards to the capability do not completely line up with the sub-elements of this document, which is maybe a bit of an oversight, but that's okay. We can kind of make this work. So I've gone through and I've tried to look at the skills on here that are most similar to the ideas I took from that SACE document. Now, just as a bit of a disclaimer here, I didn't have to look at that SACE document, and if I've never seen it before, I'd be better off just starting with this document, okay? So I know this is where you're freaking out because I'm taking you through all these different documents, but what I can see here is, like, if I'm talking about text structures, knowledge of basic differences between different types of texts that will help me compose them, that's definitely a skill I want to have. But I can see that at the higher level, I'm using a more comprehensive knowledge and all of this kind of business, all right? I'm not going to go into all of this text and writing stuff. I'm going to show you some practicality here, okay? Where's my literacy at, okay? I haven't started my research yet. Where's my literacy at? Well, let's test, okay? Here's a graphic novel. Oh, look at this. I love Spider-Man. Fantastic. Oh, I wonder if me knowing that it's Spider-Man gets me any points. Probably not. All right. How would I describe this from a professional context? To be honest, I don't know a lot at this stage. I would say, yes, it's a comic or it's a graphic novel. I would say it's a superhero comic. I'm not going to read it out loud to you here, but it looks like it's got a bit of action and a bit of dialogue in there. I assume dialogue is maybe what we use. It seems to kind of, like, you read it horizontally, I'm guessing, like you would read a book. You can kind of see me going about this. You get the idea. If I tried to compare these two things, well, what's the difference? Well, I'd probably say that, the key difference to me is that one's black and white and the other one isn't. And one seems to be like a superhero, whereas the other one seems to be like, I don't know, more of a drama or a romance or a comedy or something like that. It seems a little bit, not lighter, but just like it's a different sort of genre of focus. But again, I don't really know, okay? I'm talking about it generally based on just what I'm seeing. So let's come over here and give myself a bit of a rating, okay? Using knowledge, Am I using some, like, was I looking at basic differences between those things? Well, all I really said was that there was a colour difference and the genre seemed to be different. So I wouldn't say there was any, I wouldn't say I was using a wide knowledge or a comprehensive knowledge. I reckon it would probably be pretty simplistic. Interpret simple text using comprehension strategies. Oh yeah, I was probably a bit above that, but I was pretty literal. Like if you look at the third one across on the second one down, interpret literal information and make inferences to expand topic knowledge. Look, you know, I was able to infer by looking at it that it seemed to be some kind of action or drama or reason, you know, but it was all based on literal information, what was in front of me. I wasn't doing any sort of deeper thinking. And it's towards the understand learning area. Vocabulary I was probably using familiar vocabulary, words that I know, related to everyday experience, pretty common knowledge stuff, probably stuff I've picked up at school and used in other contexts, but there probably wasn't a lot of specialist stuff in there. So I'm going to give myself this as a rating. Okay, this is where I think I'm at the moment. Now, ideally, I want to be here, okay? Because this is about development. I want to develop my skills. I want to develop my capability. All right, so here's my goal. This is what the capability stuff's all about. Now, I'm not ditching all of the graphic novel stuff I want to do. I'm still researching, but I need to think about how I can build my skills as a result. Okay, so let me just highlight this relatively quickly. If you've looked at my folio example, you'll see one of the sources I looked at was this, A Brief Guide to Comic Book Art Styles. If you look at my key findings from that, you'll find that I took these terms, like there were different terms, like the Golden Age, the Silver Age, the Dark Age are all sort of different eras that had different kind of characteristics to them. So that was sort of interesting. It didn't give me heaps. You can see it gave me about a sentence worth of information. So I went to another source by J. Johnson, which was about the history of comic books and the stylistic features of them. You can see a bit of an extract there. And here's my key findings for that. And you can see I'm writing here like the Bronze Age was categorized in this article to be a time where surrealism began to subside. Photorealism was more in focus. Landscapes were less outlandish. Grand costumes took a back seat. Alter egos and more humanistic portrayals of characters. Lighting began to play a more significant role. Just in that, there's a lot of quite specific understanding, isn't there? So let me give this a shot, okay? Bear with me here, okay? So I'm going to go back, all right? I'm looking at the same thing, okay? Now, I'm obviously not going to tell you everything I read, but you tell me if you can see a difference in my vocabulary and my literacy around this, okay? So I am going to suggest that this is a Bronze Age publication. Now, the reason I say that is because before that was the Silver Age, and as mentioned in that little extract I gave you, that was more about surrealism than realism, okay? It was about fantasy worlds, it was about elaborate sort of costumes and everything sort of being a little bit bigger than Ben-Hur, whereas this to me looks more realistic. It's in an office building, it's in the middle of the day, the characters are sort of drawn more realistically, so those are the kind of characteristics of the Bronze Age that really are apparent to me. I can also see like basic lighting styles are sort of starting to come in. I can see a bit of shadow there, but what I know is that the next era is the Dark Age, and those ones were predominantly, the setting was often at night and it was very sort of light and shade, contrast, shadowy, and I don't see that in this case. So I see this as earlier than the Dark Age but later than the Silver Age. I think it's probably a Bronze Age publication. If I'm looking along here at the comparison, I've come to learn a few extra terms. To me, the one on the far side now on the right looks to me like a manga, which was a form that was made in Japan, so Japan-based. Some of the characteristics of that are the heavy detail in the body, but kind of light detail in the face, very simplistic facial design with big eyes and quite large heads. Black and white was the distinctive style of the original manga, so that makes sense to me as to why it's black and white. It's not necessarily because it's older. There we have it. You've heard me talk about the same stuff twice. The question is, have we noticed a difference? This is where I assessed myself at the beginning, and the orange represents where I want to be. Did you see anything? Would you say that my skills have developed as a result of my study in the area of graphic novels? Let's start at the bottom, understanding learning area vocabulary. Look, I think I was able to use some quite subject-specific vocabulary. You know, I was talking not only about the ages, but I was talking about the styles. You heard me kind of talking about realism and not surrealism and not, you know, all of that kind of business. So I don't think I'm quite in the orange yet, but I think I was better than I was before. In terms of interpreting and analysing the information, comparing those two texts, again, I think I had a better sense of how they were different because of my understanding of their background. Again, it wasn't perfect, but I think it was better. And I think you could see I was using a developing knowledge of the features of different texts to actually comprehend what I was seeing. So I'm going to give myself my green. It's going to tell me this is where I think I'm at now. So what I've hopefully showed you in this little example is how my skills in literacy have developed. They're not perfect yet. So where could I go from here? Well, I could read more, I could get more vocabulary, I could read more specialist sort of stuff, I could find more detail that I could draw from that. Hopefully I can get towards the orange later on down the track in my study. But showing you this midway point was really important because I'm showing you that I've got specific goals about this capability and this is what I want to develop and this is what development will look like for me. This is how I'm capturing it. So a couple of key things. In order to do well in D4, I have to show how my skills develop over the project. I can't just say, oh yeah, my literacy is really good. I have to be specific and I have to show where I started versus how I grow. I need to be specific. I need to set up opportunities to evaluate myself. So do you notice, like I looked at that thing at the beginning, I looked at Spider-Man at the beginning, and then I made myself look at it again in the middle so that I could compare my vocabulary. So I actually set up an opportunity to capture evidence of my development. Okay, if you don't do that, you're in trouble. And my reflection should be really specific and detailed to show that development. Now, this video's gone on for ages, so you're probably freaking out, but quick thing, because I know reflections are really important. You can pause it, go get a drink, but let me just show you the kind of stuff I'm seeing in your photos. Look at this. This source has helped me to develop my literacy capability. Literacy is about reading and interpreting texts, and by reading this text, I have had to interpret its meaning, which I've shown in my key findings. In order to develop this skill further, I will keep reading. Okay, so I read heaps of stuff like this when it comes to capability reflection, and this might be you, and if it is, here you go. It's a D. It's superficial, it's not related to your topic, and it's not showing any development. Okay, it's got to be specific. So let me give you the A sample here just to kind of take you through. Okay, here's the difference. This is what I should be seeing in a good capability reflection. One of my goals in developing my literacy skills is to develop subject-specific vocabulary to help me analyse graphic novel texts. This source has exposed me to a number of specialist terms such as example, which are used to describe the era where the graphic novel was created. The source gave only a brief description of the characteristics, hinting that each have distinctive art styles. However, in order to analyse graphic novel text with greater shade of meaning, that term actually came from the Continuum, I need to research further into the distinctive art features of each age, and that's going to allow me to look at distinctive features within a particular graphic novel and use more specialised vocabulary to analyse its composition. So do you notice how this is much more specific to what I'm actually trying to do? It's focused on development. It's about saying, here's where I am, but I don't get this. I need this to go further. And it's goal orientated. Here's where I'm going to go next because this is where I want to be at the end. If you can capture these elements and take this approach to your capability reflection, then you'll find yourself in that higher band. But if your capability is just something superficial that sits on the side that you haven't really thought about and you haven't worked into your research process, guess what? It's not going to turn out very well in terms of your assessment. I hope this video has been valuable to you and given you some insight into how you can approach your capabilities to get the best result in research.